this week on SDC, we look at the fact that Facebook nearly deleted Facebook. We look at the latest security changes coming to hundreds of millions of Google users, and a how-to on WhatsApp's latest update, which is one you really need to use.
It has been an absolutely terrible week for Facebook. They've had this big hearing going on, and then they had this massive outage, which killed Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp for 5 hours.
I think to start with, we need to look at what happened this week, because it wasn't a security issue. I mean, immediately everybody started saying, oh, Facebook's been hacked, which is just a silly knee-jerk reaction.
Well, it was kind of hacked, but it was an inside job.
Yeah, it did. So go on then, who wants to have a crack at explaining BGP and what happened?
Go for it, mate.
Yeah, you do it, David. You're the technical one.
Well, let's put it in we'll simplify this because it is ridiculously complex otherwise. But essentially, Facebook itself updated a configuration file that tells its routers how to communicate with the internet, something called BGP, which is Border Gateway Protocol. It's very complex, and I'm not going to go into it, believe me. You'll be thankful for that. But essentially what happened is they made a mistake in the configuration file, just an error. And that error then propagated out, affected their DNS, effectively told the internet that Facebook doesn't exist anymore. Our servers don't exist, go away. Ordinarily, that wouldn't be, well, it would be a problem, but it wouldn't be as big a problem because they'd find out that they've done this very quickly indeed. They'd then correct that configuration file, send that out. That would then propagate out and say, hello, actually, we do still exist, we're still alive. And the internet would connect again and we'd all be fine. But the problem here was this integrated ecosystem that Facebook have got, which is why WhatsApp and Instagram went down as well, because everything relies on Facebook and Facebook's infrastructure. And that includes all their security. So this is the people that then could try and would need to amend and correct that configuration file, couldn't get authenticated to do so because Facebook was down. This is Facebook staff,
right? I mean, this was like a comedy sketch. It was like,
it was a comedy sketch.
File, we can't get in. We'll just go in and do it manually. No, the access control's down.
Yeah,
you know, you could just imagine this. Wow, how have we allowed this to happen, right?
They use the locks that allow you into the server room to go in manually to correct this file. Didn't work because they need Facebook to authorize the locks. They're smart locks. The head of security couldn't get it. Nobody could get it. It was absolutely ridiculous.
Insane levels of inadequacy, isn't it, and ineptness. And the thing is that it did actually start rumors that Facebook had been hacked, and those rumors would make sense to lots of people. And then there were also Facebook details that were turning up on one of these dark web forums, which, as we know, happens all the time. But people were making these tenuous links between, you know, these new details that have turned up. Have they been stolen from Facebook? So, you know, all the dialogue about Facebook this week has been entirely negative. We're not just talking about the security aspect, which obviously there, I mean, single point of failure, absolute awful, but also on the privacy side as well, because people go onto Facebook and all they see is ads. You know, this is what this whole hearing is about, how this is damaging young people, how this is causing kind of eating disorders, suicide even. And Facebook is sitting on all this awful research about how its products damage people, and being allowed to get away with it. So
it's been a very, very, very costly week. I mean, the outage has affected Facebook's share price. That's tumbled a bit, but also the advertising issue debate at the minute is going badly for them. That's costing them money as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've actually heard some new figures a couple of weeks ago relating to Apple's app tracking transparency feature, which basically makes it difficult to use the identifier for advertisers, which Facebook uses to identify people as they browse, which means it doesn't have the figures to say to advertisers, well, we know that somebody clicked on this ad or they went to the website of this company. So therefore, the reporting aspect, which they are so good at or were so good at, is being affected as well. They're being hammered from absolutely every side.
I'll give you a twisted perspective, right? So whistleblower comes forward and starts to talk about all these inside emails and the inside track on the algorithm. We know the algorithm has been covered in various documentaries. This is the thing that engages you, keeps your engagement levels on their various sites, and it knows that negative stories, it knows as an algorithm, negative stories engage better than positive stories, and that's why we get hatred and all those kinds of feeds. So whistleblower comes forward, lawmaker hearings, regulatory hearings, right? So that's the news cycle. So what on earth could you do if you were Facebook to try and change the news cycle? I'll tell you one thing you could do. You could put a typo into a config file. And I'll tell you where this stuff wasn't being discussed for half of yesterday on Facebook, right?
So it's not all been negative this week. Let's clear things up a little bit, shall we? And it's going to be a surprise to everybody, I guess, but I'm cheering people up, hopefully, with some good news from Google, of all people. And this is a follow-on, if you like, from my story back in May, I think it was, where I said that Google were planning on flicking a security switch for millions and millions of users. This is all to do with implementing 2FA, but automatically enrolling users into two-factor authentication for their Google accounts. And now Google has come out this week and said that by the end of the year, an additional 150 million accounts will be automatically enrolled into 2FA.
That's great. So what does it actually mean for Google's wider users, perhaps people who wouldn't necessarily know about security and two-factor authentication, how it works, what type of two-factor authentication they're going to be using?
This is the important thing. It's all very well bigging up the security bonuses, the positives of using a second factor of authentication, which are well known to us, a great thing. But a lot of people, and I know a lot of people because they've been in touch with me since I wrote that original article back in May, are concerned that if their Google account is automatically enrolled into this 2FA scheme, that they're going to find themselves locked out. So I've actually been talking to the Director of Account Security and Safety at Google, Gumi Kim, and asking her exactly how this process is going to work. And I started off by asking how this selection process works. So which accounts are going to find themselves automatically enrolled. And she told me that this is those who regularly sign into their accounts and, importantly, engage with Google products on their mobile devices. So if you ask me, that's a pretty big net, but they're going to refine it somewhat, as they're also going to be needing those users to be those who have also got recovery information already on their account, so a phone number or an email address that can be used as recovery. So that's great. Google and Gumi assure me that this means that 2FA auto-enrollment won't be disrupted. So obviously I pressed further because I'm a grumpy old git and that's what I do. And I asked what this process is going to look like to somebody who's one of the chosen 150 million extra. And here we go. So you'll be notified 7 days before the sign-in method changes from password only to two-factor authentication. And you'll be offered an option to turn it on immediately if you like at that point. You'll be notified again when the change is made 7 days later. And these notifications will come by email and mobile phone. Now this sounds good, but again, is that you're being enrolled? Well, no, it gets better because Gumi assures me that there will be an option to opt out, if you like, which again is good because it means you don't have to sign up, but it's bad because signing up's a good thing. And Google are pressing ahead on the YouTube side. They're telling me that by the end of the year, 2 million YouTube creators will have to use 2FA.
I think when you look at this good news story coming out of Google, and there have been a few on the security front, the kind of the creds front and the 2FA front, I think the issue is people get confused between why we warn people about Google and Facebook and security. So there's a big difference between securing your access to a platform and what happens within the platform. I know we've talked about it with Facebook and the fact that, even if Facebook secure your communications, they're still mining your data. So, you may be whispering to a friend, but you're in a supermarket and all the CCTV cameras are pointed at you. And it's the same here. It's kind of, don't mix up the two. Yeah, absolutely use 2FA when it's available. This is clearly a good move. but it doesn't mean that we should, roll back any of the pressure on Google and Facebook and others to ease up in terms of some of the invasive practices that take place even within a more secure architecture.
Which probably brings us into your stories this week, doesn't it, Zach? Again, looking at messaging and...
Yeah, I think it's been really interesting, and I think in light of what's happened with WhatsApp and the Facebook outage that we've discussed, I mean, clearly, WhatsApp's much more heavily used on Android than it is on iPhone. Just the nature of it. Most iPhone users, particularly in the US, use iMessage, although that has its own issues, as we've talked about. But I think on the WhatsApp side, they've made their biggest innovation, or their most innovative change in years recently, which is the multi-device access. The fact that you can log on from more than your phone. That's in what's called public beta, which means you can use it, right? You can go and you can turn it on. We'll explain how to do that. We'll show how to do that on STC this week. And that's really important because that is something that Google Messages, in contrast, cannot do. So Google Messages, when you want to run it on an encrypted basis, is very much limited to your device. iMessage can do it, Google Messages can't. Now WhatsApp can. I think this is interesting because I think what we're seeing in the background, we've seen it for a little while now, is this messaging war. And we've seen Google really pushing the messages from becoming the default messaging platform with RCS and Android devices. Clearly, Apple is promoting iMessage and trying to do much more with iMessage. And meanwhile, you've got WhatsApp, which is starting to correct some of its biggest issues, multi-device access, encrypted backups, and the like. I think it's really important that people start to experiment with these features and see what they use. But I think there's another story which we're going to cover. We're going to cover soon on STC, which is about what this means for Apple and Google, because the kind of the elephant in the room, if you like, is that you can't message securely between an Android and an iPhone device unless you use a third-party platform, and that kind of means using Facebook. And Apple and Google, if you like, are handing this massive audience to Facebook and seem unable to do anything about it.
And then we've also got Signal as well, haven't we? Obviously, Signal has nowhere near the scale of WhatsApp, and we would like it to, but anywhere near that yet. But what's a good idea really, I guess, is to kind of just mention to people that Signal is the best platform for encrypted messaging, for being owned by people who aren't just out to make profits, who don't have any other kind of interests other than this platform, and it is a charity, so it relies on donations, doesn't it?
The problem is, of course, that we're talking about critical mass here, and critical mass is important. That's the reason why everybody isn't deleting their Facebook account, because their social circle of friends are on Facebook and they're not on Signal, they're not on Twitter. Likewise, you have a circle of friends that are on Twitter and aren't on the others. Getting over this critical mass issue is just almost impossible now. I mean, WhatsApp is a good example again. I've got lots of people that I have to talk to on WhatsApp because they're not on other messaging platforms. And it's as simple as, no matter what we say about security and privacy on any messaging platform, you can only use the ones where your friends are.
There was a pivot point. You're absolutely right, but there was a pivot point, and in kind of March, April timeframe. WhatsApp was on the back foot. It was under pressure from regulators in places like India and Brazil. There was a huge user backlash in the countries where it has an enormous install base, right? Not here in Europe, certainly not in the US, but in parts of Africa, South America, and Asia. And WhatsApp responded. And the really interesting thing, kind of, closing the loop here for STC this week, the really interesting thing is, in responding to that backlash, WhatsApp has distanced itself from Facebook, right? What it's done in essence is said, look, we're not going to share data. We're not going to force these terms and conditions, which were kind of mandated by Facebook. There's a big difference. And if you like, Facebook Messenger's biggest competitor is WhatsApp. And WhatsApp, I think, has done a really good job of recovering the situation. Signal flew and then tailed off. Telegram saw a big surge in installs with the latest Facebook outage, but that will clearly tail off as well. So WhatsApp's done a really good job. I don't know if there's going to be any reverberations or repercussions rather because of the outage and the fact that it impacted WhatsApp. I guess not. Signal was down for a few hours, a few months ago as well. It happens, right? I think we all get that it happens. Facebook has been down before. This isn't the first time that it suffered this kind of issue. It was just a timing issue. But I think your point is right, and I think, as we say constantly on SDC, just think about the platforms that you use and how you use them, and have security in mind.